answered in kind. 33. May you have the strength to grasp this. There is a peculiar tragedy that arises when a tradition founded upon liberation forgets the texture of freedom and instead clutches its own reflection. Christianity, in many of its contemporary manifestations, appears not merely to have missed the mark, but to have overshot it so violently that it has landed in the very abyss it once warned against, dragging others with it, not by invitation, but by force of gravity. This is not apostasy from without. It is implosion from within. What we are witnessing is not a loss of faith, but a failure of integration. Unresolved anguish, unexamined shame, and inherited terror, left unattended for generations, have coagulated into doctrine. Pain, when denied articulation, does not dissipate. It mutates. It circulates. It becomes a closed system, a hermetic loop of recrimination and fear, radiating outward and mistaking its own turbulence for divine urgency. This is what trauma looks like when it is sanctified. And yet, curiously, the very word trauma is resisted, minimized, softened into euphemism. Church hurt, some say, as though linguistic diminishment could anesthetize psychic injury, as though abuse, coercion, silencing, and terror, when administered beneath stained glass, were somehow alchemized into virtue. But trauma that is denied is not healed. It is merely deputized. It recruits. It perpetuates itself through moralism, through surveillance, through an obsession with regulating the lives of others, while steadfastly refusing self-examination. Thus arises the fixation. Who may love whom? Who may marry? Who may belong? Who may speak? The preoccupation is not holiness, but control masquerading as order. Complexity is treated as contamination. Difference is construed as decay. And all the while, the suffering of those already wounded by Christianity is ignored, deferred, or, most damningly, contractually silenced through non-disclosure agreements that bind pain into secrecy and elevate institutional preservation over human dignity. This is not righteousness. It is clericalized dissociation. Some proclaim with nostalgic fervor, "Make America Christian again," as though faith were a territory to be reclaimed rather than a presence to be embodied. But this longing betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and a spiritual law alike. Coercion does not generate devotion. It generates compliance at best, rebellion at worst, and numbness most often. What is imposed cannot be loved. What is enforced cannot be trusted. People do not flee truth. They flee suffocation. Human beings follow what feels right, not in the sense of indulgence, but in the deeper somatic register where resonance, safety, and meaning converge. When a belief system feels constrictive, punitive, or surveilled, the nervous system recoils. This is not moral failure. It is biological intelligence. To condemn this reflex is to wage war against embodiment itself. Christianity, as presently weaponized in certain quarters, is not inviting, it is coercive, and coercion is always an admission of doubt. If truth were trusted to be self-authenticating, if God were trusted to be competent, there would be no need for legislative enforcement, cultural domination, or fear-based compliance. The very insistence on force betrays a secret unbelief in the sufficiency of love. Here, the analogy becomes unavoidable. The family bears down too heavily upon the child, mistaking domination for guidance, obedience for intimacy. The child does not grow closer. The child learns to hide, to fragment, or eventually to flee. Some go silent. Some go no contact. Some never return. And the family, bewildered, insists it was only ever trying to help. So too with Christianity. The ones being pushed away are often the very ones it claims to want to save. And the irony sharpens further when one considers the vastness of the tradition itself. Christianity is not monolithic. It is radically plural. Over 45,000 denominations, each claiming proximity to truth, many claiming exclusivity to it. This is not unity. It is proliferation without coherence. In such an environment, Christianity becomes a convenient guise for righteousness, a moral costume behind which harm can be concealed. Abuse can be rationalized, power can be hoarded, silence can be enforced. Where there is secrecy, there is rot. Where there are NDAs, there is fear. Where there is fear, there is no love, whatever name is invoked. And yet, despite all this, something essential has been missed by both critics and defenders alike. That which dissolves under scrutiny was never the living thing. There is the potential for Christianity to collapse under the weight of its own force, as any coercive system eventually must. And if it does, it will not be faith that disintegrates, but its false accretions. The shell will crack, the idol will fall, and what remains will be what was real all along. This is not destruction, it is revelation. The deeper failure, then, is not theological, but pedagogical. Emotional intelligence was never properly taught. Self-regulation, introspection, psychological literacy, these were neglected in favor of obedience and certainty. As a result, unprocessed fear fermented into hatred, and that hatred turned inward, devouring the very tradition that birthed it. Projection replaced discernment. Enemies were invented to avoid the far more terrifying task of self-confrontation. To see sin everywhere except within is not holiness, it is evasion. And truth has a particular fragrance, as does evasion have a distinct odor. Lies are cold and hollow. You can knock on its walls. No one home, only avoidance hiding in the shadows, pretending it cannot be seen. Its outside is a facade, painted to look like the real thing, while truth is full, bright, and open. You cannot knock on its walls, because it has none. It is nothing but presence. There is a strange terror that grips those who cannot sit with ambiguity, who cannot tolerate the humility of not knowing. They clutch doctrine like a life raft, not realizing they are gripping the wrong thing. Not wrong in the sense of immoral, but wrong in the sense of non-functional. It does not serve. It does not heal. It does not liberate. It constricts. It calcifies. It reproduces the very suffering it claims to oppose. And so judgment proliferates. Condemnation becomes reflexive. The evil eye replaces the compassionate gaze. But to see another as separate from God is to forget the presence that animates both observer and observed. If there were never anything outside of God, if all were expressions of a singular, infinite intelligence, then condemnation is always self-directed, whether consciously or not. This misalignment is perhaps nowhere more evident than in movements that proclaim reverence for life while demonstrating little regard for the living. Abstraction triumphs over embodiment. The unborn are defended with ferocity. The exhausted mother is dismissed. The child is sanctified in utero and abandoned in reality. Suffering is spiritualized, poverty moralized, and structural cruelty baptized as personal responsibility. This is not reverence. It is metaphysical negligence. And hovering over all of it is the unspoken assumption that God requires this: fear, rage, control, domination, as though the infinite needed human cruelty to accomplish divine ends. This, too, is a form of blasphemy. To imagine God as so fragile, so incompetent, that he must be defended through violence of thought, word, or law. Fear is not adjacent to grace. Without self-mastery, without the discipline to observe one's own mind, correct one's own projections, and metabolize one's own pain, love becomes indistinguishable from fear. Tunnel vision ensues. People sprint toward the finish lines that do not exist, believing suffering to be evidence of faithfulness. Duality is preached. Non-duality is ridiculed. And yet, peace remains stubbornly present in those who remember that there was never anything outside of God to begin with. Sin, in this light, is not a cosmic crime, but a misalignment, a momentary forgetting. And forgetting does not require punishment. It requires remembrance. When one stumbles, the task is not to grovel, but to recalibrate. Forgiveness is not leniency, it is accuracy. Scripture itself bears the marks of human hands, mistranslations, omissions, patriarchal revisions, power interests disguised as revelation. To point this out is not heresy, it is literacy. To bind another's freedom through these distortions is to assume their lessons, to trespass upon their becoming, to enthrone fear where faith ought to dwell. Compassion, then, is not infinite tolerance of harm, nor is it self-annihilation in service of appeasement. Compassion includes boundaries. It includes truth-telling. It includes the refusal to poison one's own mind with thoughts that serve no one. What you send out will always return. Many times, immediately. Some do not believe in karma, and that is how you know they do not understand it. Inversely, as was stated a moment ago, to bind another's freedom is to assume their lessons. Likewise, to hold your tongue and speak not the truth can put off the lessons of those who need to learn. Karma is action, and it is not always about the observer witnessing these lessons another must endure, because even to hold on to that knot of bitterness, the tangle of blame in the belly, is indicative of a lack of education on emotional intelligence. What you send out will always return. What you dwell upon you will feel. I assure you, bitterness is not worth it. Breathe love into it and release it to the wind. Blame will only serve to keep your own power cinched down tight upon yourself, and you deserve better than that. To seek an apology that may never arrive is to dwell in external validation when you are the only one who can validate what you feel. If one tries to tell you that you do not feel what you think you are feeling, they themselves may have lost sight of humanity and are in a pit of despair all their own. What is sent out or dwelled upon will always return. Not always in the physical, but always in feeling. Not as punishment, but as coherence. The recoil of contraction is felt instantly by the one who dwells upon anything less expansive than love. This is why we say, ask and you will receive. Ask and be surrounded by your answer. When fear crystallizes into identity, it will defend itself viciously, even at the cost of peace. And you deserve that peace. We all do. We may be tempted to dwell within blame, but the reason we call it the blame game is because you can play it until your last breath, never doing anything but keeping score. Burn the scorecard. It does not serve you, and never will. Just as hate never cured hate, and contempt never healed contempt, any win within the blame game will always be a false victory. Soon the triumph fades, but the shadows remain. Because at the end of it, where does the blame end and peace begin? Do we excuse harm? No. But cruelty never equated correction. Do we blame the one who did the harm? Or their parents, their grandparents, teachers, professors, friends? The only way to stop this storm is to cease to perpetuate its circuit. and continue to teach each other the best we possibly can. So, remember that presence, that indwelling presence which beats your heart, breathes your breath, blinks your eyes, the awareness beneath the noise, the intelligence within. I am. Where attention goes, being follows. What is attended to is amplified, and what is real does not require force. May you have the strength to grasp all of this. Nothing false has ever survived being loved into the light. Praise love and pass the compassion.